So one of the friends was saying they were sure that they had seen Mr. Dunbar somewhere. And then we were sort of recollecting, and the friend remembered he had seen Mr. Dunbar in a movie from the 1950s, and that's accurate because Mr. Dunbar is a star of stage and screen. So his artistic interests are vast. And I think you're seeing his artistry this evening, are you not? So with that, then Mr. Dunbar, please.
Forgive me, I'm going to leave my coat off. Most of you have your coats off too.
You have to raise it from David Young's height.
Sorry. Well, I hope you all got something to eat. There's quite a bit there. I was interested in coming up to Oregon, being from California, because I understand that about half Oregon is Californian now, so I thought, is that a sensitive issue? I'm sorry.
As long as they don't joke about our web feet, yeah.
How are we doing? Are they collecting some questions? Is that something's happening there? In line with, we've already kind of broached this idea of their individual responsibilities and their collective responsibilities in the faith. And the individual responsibilities have pretty well been defined by Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha and the Guardian. Of course, one of our individual responsibilities is collective activity. So that there really isn't one versus the other. But the point is that I was trying to make earlier is that we need to think about our own individual spiritual enrichment, our own life. We need to connect ourselves to the sources of spiritual refreshment and take that in. And Baha'u'llah has confirmed this in the Kitab-i-Aqdas by calling upon us to say obligatory prayers on the one hand, to fast, and you'll recall he himself talks about religion being a heaven, and the sun of that heaven, he says, is fasting, and the moon of that heaven is obligatory prayer. Now, I mention that because let us consider that the sun is fasting. Is probably the highest spiritual law we have, in a sense. They're both luminaries, but one not far outstretches the other, but both of them illumine our life. And there's nothing in the 5-year plan about giving up obligatory prayer, in case anybody had thought you saw that somewhere. These are the sources of our growth. Somebody asked Shoghi Effendi if it wasn't transcendental meditation, but it was that kind of a yoga meditation or something that didn't we need this really to complement our spiritual life? And he said that in general, Baha'u'llah is the supreme manifestation, the wisdom of our Creator, focused through Him to us to tell us what we need to do. And what He told us we need to do is what we need to do. And it's fairly simple and straightforward, and it doesn't. We shouldn't try to add things onto it or think that there may be deeper things that we could find. I remember one of the early Baha'is in Nicaragua told me when I got there that, because they were only reading in Spanish and there wasn't a lot of literature in Spanish, they said, the Baha'i faith is good for general understanding of life and everything, but for spiritual understanding, you need the Rosicrucian teachings. I thought, okay. We better get the Igan translated and some other essential writings into Spanish. That was way back in the 50s. So, I think my thoughts went back to dessert or something.
He's one of us.
Yes, I may be in disguise tonight, but... So, those individual responsibilities, we don't want to lose sight of. And what are they? They're fasting, which if we, for health reasons or some other reason we can't fast, we should at least beg the bounties of the fast and use the prayers and remember the rest of the people that are fasting, that they could attain to the goal. Obligatory prayer, which obviously is something you don't want to do without, and is a daily responsibility, and it's not the kind of thing you want to say, well, I'll say it at the end of the week. I mean, you really... And you hear people, they sometimes say they don't have time for that kind of thing. I forget because I'm so busy. But you ask them, did you forget to eat lunch every day this week, or forget to eat today? Or it's kind of the same thing. You're feeding the physical body requires that you feed it. Just because the spiritual one doesn't shout at you, it needs the food too in order to sustain itself. And then to that, Baha'u'llah adds the recitation of the verses morning and evening. Now, he doesn't give a quantity. He talks about the quality. He says that those verses should give wings to your spirit. Joy should come from it. And of course, as you grow in sensitivity to the Word of God, every time you come in contact with it, it should fire us up. It should lift us. If it doesn't, we need to be reading more of it during the day and replacing some of those burnout cells we may have that keep us from looking as bright as we would like to be. So those are the key essential elements of the spiritual life. And if there were others that were so very, very important, study is, of course, part of that. Then Shoghi Effendi in his time, I'm moving on from Baha'u'llah, he oftentimes in the last period of his life had Leroy Iwas write to the friends about 4 essential aspects of a Baha'is life, an individual Baha'is life. And he said they were prayer, meditation, study, and action. Now, we're hearing from the House of Justice that, the study of the faith should lead to service or to action. So you want to think that part of what you're doing, these 3 aspects are individual in character. The action part might be an individual action of teaching, or it might be getting into one of the activities of your cluster and supporting that. But these 3 are internal, and they define, if you will, the character of the action. If we are prayerful, if we meditate, if we study the writings, if we know what we're doing, then we can attract divine confirmation, and then our action is significant. A little earlier I was talking about studying the writings. The new Baha'i should study the writings and learn them thoroughly. The major books, he said, Kitab-i-Gan, Some Answered Questions, and the Dawnbreakers. Dawnbreakers requires a special kind of study, but he said that would inspire the Baha'is to act in the spirit of the Dawnbreakers. Those episodes would have a profound effect, and he took the time in his early guardianship to translate and edit the whole book of Nabil's narrative. It's an amazing feat. Almost a year he was involved in that. And we read it and we say, we come to the Persian names and we say Haji, whatever, and we keep skipping the Persian names. And then we get the stories kind of all confused because we haven't really concentrated on the names. I know that people who are giving effective courses on the Dawnbreakers usually spend, before they even start, they look at that chart of pronunciation equivalents of English and Persian. And then they pronounce the names, and then they read the whole list of transliterated terms several times, especially with the youth. So that then they kind of take pride in pronouncing it right, Haji Mirza Karim Khan, okay. Instead of Qudus and some other names you hear. That's supposed to be Qudus in case. So it's important to know the names so that you can keep track of the way they weave in and out of history. That's a study in itself. You ask yourself, have I made a careful study and reading of the Dawnbreakers, of this very precious gift that Shoghi Effendi spent a year of his life preparing for us? Have I received that gift? Have I internalized it? And what would its effect be on my life? Important questions to ask ourselves. Now, Shoghi Effendi with the pilgrims, he talked about these 4 too. He said that we should pray and meditate like the Persians. We're talking about the 1950s. People have morphed into different types of things, but the Persians have a long tradition of very devoted prayer and meditation. They've been faced with persecutions. It drives the thing into you, And they had martyrs in their families, and it's a very serious enterprise being a Baha'i, and you oftentimes, of course, had to go back to the spirit of the writings. Then they also have the music of the original language, both the Persian and the Arabic, which is so helpful to the devoted life. We've got them in English, and we need to absorb them. A book like Prayers and Meditations by Baha'u'llah that Shoghi Effendi prepared for us. Why did he prepare this long book? Wouldn't a little prayer book have been sufficient, since that's what we've used for the last 40 years? Why not look at this book? Why not study it? For the first time, we have the prayers of the manifestation of God, addressing God about his own circumstances and what he's been suffering in this world and how he responds to the characters around him, and to the deaf ear of mankind. Can you imagine Baha'u'llah with universal consciousness, aware of the state of every soul, with the power and the revelation that can transform them into eternal beings? And the people saying, no thank you, no thank you. Turning to their, not even no thank you, but start throw stones at you and shut you up and tell you to shut up, or shoot you with a firing squad. We don't do very well with the things that God sends us, basically, if we take a careful look at it. We don't share the things that he's given us, and we certainly don't treat the messengers very well. You are a singular exception, having embraced the faith in a time when it's not yet recognized. This is like the early Christians. It took 300 years before Christianity started to have some apparent weight with the public. And in the meanwhile, if you were trying to teach Christianity, what recourse would you have? You'd be telling stories, pilgrim notes from the time of Jesus, and you'd mention it to somebody, and they'd say, no, I haven't heard of that, but I heard of this other prophet up in Syria here, and there's another one in southern Turkey, and don't they say the same things? And how do you know this guy was who he says he was? Who did he say he was? God? We're in that same circumstance. We're speaking about this message, which is the greatest thing that's ever happened to the planet, and we have to dress it down so carefully and introduce it with such wisdom and caution, so that we can attract the heart sufficiently to have it begin to vibrate to the beauty of it. Now, Shoghi Effendi says there are waiting souls, everybody, every place in the world, there are waiting souls. And that we should pray to Baha'u'llah to lead us to waiting souls, or pray to Baha'u'llah that we might attract waiting souls. Or pray to Baha'u'llah, he says in another place, to lead waiting souls to you. That's easier than running around knocking on doors. I don't mean to knock that, because there's places where that works very well too, but the point is that our own relationship with Baha'u'llah changes the possibilities around us with regard to teaching. Pathetic it is when you hear Baha'is say, well, I try to teach, but nobody's interested. Everybody I talk to, they just don't care about it. What's wrong with that picture? Me, not the listeners. Something's the matter with the way I'm delivering it, that something so precious doesn't produce any interest at all. So, okay, if the panorama around us is more challenging in the sense you can't find people that are interested, turn inward and see if you can turn up your own spiritual volume, so to speak, so that it will reach out and touch people in a way that maybe previously wasn't necessary, but is now, if we're going to attract people out of the morass that they're sunk in. Now, the other thing that Shoghi Effendi, let's see, did I get through the three? Meditation, prayer, meditation. Meditation means thinking about the revealed words of God. I don't see much shrift in the writings for meditation being a state of abstracting yourself out of the world and trying to empty yourself of all extraneous things, of anything. It's like, trying to push darkness out of a dark room without the help of light. It really doesn't come to anything. The thing is to turn to the light, and then the whole question of the darkness disappears. And in thinking about any subject we bring to bear on it, the revealed verses of God, and it's the start of illumination. The faith is very strong about studying sciences and using reason. It's the gift of God. The greatest gift we have is the gift of understanding this rational power that we have. We're not religious fanatics in the sense that we don't recognize that. We do recognize that science is in an evolving mode, and so the paradigms of science get thrown off and new ones get adopted. We have to realize that where science hasn't discovered what matches something that's in the faith, we've got to be patient. It'll come around eventually to talk about what's in the faith also. So this is important for us to know. And be patient a little bit with the conclusions that science, certain theories that they have, that they get so used that they become like standard icons of knowledge, like evolution from monkeys and animals. The faith definitely doesn't entertain that. It says we could have evolved through many shapes, but there was always something that was the human species. It isn't that we're just smarter chimpanzees or something. And this power of reason, Abdu'l-Baha over and over stresses in his talks in America, is the thing that distinguishes man in his spiritual nature from man in his animal nature. And it's a supernatural power. And the thing that proves it, he says, is that it surpasses nature. Nature is blind to its capacities and powers. But man, through his reasoning power, penetrates nature and strikes blows at it. Nature says to man, you can't fly. I mean, can you fly? But man has worked out a way to use the laws of nature and fly. Nature says you can't go to the bottom of the sea. But man figures out a way to do it. He even goes and walks on the moon. I mean, this is not part of nature's plan. But it is part of God's plan. And you know how Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha define science? He says that science is an emanation of the Son of Truth. And in fact, one place Abdu'l-Baha says that if it were not for the power of the Holy Spirit, you would not have the capacity of thinking. Thinking itself is a spiritual power provided to man. The rational powers, besides just the human desires and attractions that we have. But it's still the way that mankind looks at this thing is very humanistic, and as best we do, we try to deny God. And I think that's because of the kind of funny legends about God and the ideas of the past and the religions is not satisfactory. So we want also to do that. I think at times I feel like complimenting people that announce themselves agnostics. I say, well, you've gotten a long way in denying, that the silly concepts of God as a creator that are published around. That the Baha'is believe those aren't true either. Baha'is believe that anything you can imagine about God is not God. That there's no capacity in human nature to understand God. There is a terrific possibility there of understanding the manifestation of God, the reflection of God in the world of creation, which is the manifestation of God. And the whole mystery and science of the manifestation of God is something we need to deepen ourselves on so that we get a clear concept of the power and sovereignty that he has and how he can act in our lives and how he can transform society. He calls for the willing submission of mankind to the revelation, and that is a transforming submission, which makes us into a new level of creatures. And this is this new race of men, as far as I can understand. Shoghi Effendi says it consists of those people who conform themselves to the revealed will of God, to the Word of God. And as they move towards this will of God, they move towards each other, and they bond, and the unity, spiritual unity of those that are closest to the purpose of the manifestation is the greatest source of joy and happiness in the world. Now, that should result in a motivation which keeps us active in the faith. And the main activity we have in the cause, of course, we have to try to support the administrative activities of the faith and the collective responsibilities that the house is asking us to fulfill. But also, that doesn't mean we don't have responsibility to teach as individuals, to seek out waiting souls, to ask Baha'u'llah to guide us in our normal activities of life, to identify people that will be receptive to the faith and be able to deliver the message to them in a proper way. That doesn't go away. That's above everything else. Sometimes we think, well, I was in the growth period, I was part of a process there and part of that, now I'm kind of resting in between, then I'll go back to do it again. And we take off of as if we could remove from ourselves the responsibility as individuals to study the writings and to teach the cause. We have that every minute of every day. We should go to sleep thinking about it. We should wake up thinking about it. But if we just go for the mechanical part of it, we burn out. And we get discouraged because we say, well, that's not the interest that we want. So it has to be combined with this illumination, which is a magnet and attracts the friends, or the contacts, you will. Shoghi Effendi has said over and over that materialism is the greatest enemy of the cause. Now think, there's lots of enemies of the cause. He says the greatest enemy is materialism. Somehow it puts the soul to sleep, so it doesn't need God or need religion or need anything but more material goods to make itself feel good. How does Shoghi Effendi characterize in his writings materialism? I've made a list here. I'm going to read it out for you. You can look these up through one of the search programs of the faith like Ocean or Baha'i Library or any one of these things. He calls it in various places crass, gross, rampant, cancerous, all-pervasive, pernicious, relentless, excessive, binding, enervating, brutal, destructive, blind, and intense. Those are the characterizations of materialism. Now you have to go look at the context of each of those. And in one place where he's calling on the Baha'is to arise, he talks about the obstacles that keep us from arising. This is from Messages of the Guardian, called the Citadel book, Citadel of Faith, page 148, if you want to not worry about trying to write it down. The gross materialism that engulfs the entire nation at the present hour, and this was addressed to the North American believers. The gross materialism that engulfs the entire nation at the present hour, the attachment to worldly things that enshrouds the souls of men, the fears and anxieties that distract their minds, pleasures and dissipations that fill their time, the prejudices and animosities that darken their outlook, the apathy and lethargy that paralyze their spiritual faculties. These are among the formidable obstacles that stand in the path of every would-be warrior in the service of Baha'u'llah. Obstacles which he must battle against and surmount in his crusade for the redemption of his own countrymen. He goes on to say, to the degree that the homefront crusader is himself cleansed of these impurities, liberated from these petty preoccupations and gnawing anxieties, delivered from these prejudices and antagonisms, emptied of self and filled by the healing and the sustaining power of God, will he be able to combat the forces arrayed against him, magnetize the souls of those whom he seeks to convert, and win their unreserved, their enthusiastic, and enduring allegiance to the faith of Baha'u'llah. Page 128, friends. That is a whole long message there, which really defines let's see if I can see these few lines. He talks about this being an evil which the nation, and indeed all those within the capitalist system, though to a lesser degree, share with that state and its satellites regarded as the sworn enemies of that system. He said that capitalism and communism were sisters, both drinking from the breast of materialism, thinking that that was the source of life and comfort. He said, then he refers to this, he said, this is the crass materialism which lays excessive and ever-increasing emphasis on material well-being, forgetful of those things of the spirit on which alone a sure and stable foundation can be laid for human society. Then he goes on to say that this cancer was born in Europe, raised in America, exported to the whole world, now even penetrating the heart of Africa, he said at that time. Any of us that have been out pioneering in places where materialism isn't quite as thick as the soup we live in here, understand how different it is. Because when I come back to it, it hits you. Like people mesmerized by living in a cocoon almost from what they were intended to be as alert spiritual beings, you know. This is a short compilation, Shoghi Effendi on materialism. I'll try to put this out as a PDF somewhere on our website that you can get to, or later on. It would be good if you could see what it is. All right, I wanted to refer a little bit to the power of divine assistance. You know, Shoghi Effendi has written a lot about this, and they're, of course, from Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha. They're wonderful quotations, and the House of Justice put them together in a compilation called "The Power of Divine Assistance" some decades ago. If you have compilation of compilations, or sometimes been published on its own, you can read through this. It talks about the requisites for divine confirmation and assistance. And it describes the confirmations that God sends to us and their effects, what that will produce in our lives and in our relationship with others. The three key aspects I think you'll find when you read through and analyze these quotations. The first very important principle that he establishes in so many different ways in the letters is overlooking our own weaknesses. He says that if we focus on our shortcomings and our weaknesses and our lack of good Baha'i life and everything, we will totally paralyze ourselves. That yes, you have to be repentant in a sense. You have to feel remorse that you're not living the way you should be living. But ask Him to help you overcome that and assist you to teach and be an element in service to mankind. Because that, of course, your healing is in that rather than sitting worrying about your faults. I always tell the youth, if you fall down, what's the rule? Get up. You think you've done something so bad, you can think of something so bad that God can't forgive. When He offers Mirza Yahya repentance in the last of the Akdas, He says that if he changes and turns toward God and asks for repentance, he will be forgiven. And you can't outdo Mirza Yahya in your evil doings. Part of the overlooking of one's weakness is also overlooking other people's weaknesses, forgiving them the shortcomings that they might have. They're facing the same kind of difficulties. Rule 1, overlooking weakness. Rule 2, reliance upon the divine promises. Now, to rely on the divine promises, you really need to rehearse them and repeat them to yourself. See what marvelous things He's promised. If you arise, like even stand up, that would be a start, Arise, open your lips, mention the name of Baha'u'llah. What kind of forces are set in motion? Angels move and divine confirmations circle you. In the last decade of his life in the crusade, Shoghi Effendi said that the divine confirmations were accumulating and under pressure in the heavenly realms because there were not sufficient people drawing on them. Do you remember he says that the revelation is like a sun that arises of revelations. The dawn of the manifestation, gradually it will move until it's the zenith, which is the golden age and divine civilization, and then it will lead to the coming of other prophets in the future. But okay, that power gets stronger all the time. It's there for us to draw on. He says, let the doubter arise and put it to test. Shoghi Effendi even says that. He realizes, we're weak, and we say, well, I don't know. I don't feel any divine confirmation. Well, did you ask for it first before you said you don't feel it? Then the other thing is to follow the call for action and experience the confirmations in teaching. Ignoring one's weakness, overlooking your weakness and faults, knowing the divine promises and relying on the divine promises, and finally arising in action, which is this fourth of the four that we talked about: prayer, meditation, study, and action. Action is really the delivering of the message. And this compilation also stresses sacrifice as the motive power for progress and success. We already spoke about that a bit. The role of the individual in the cause is something that is quite unique. We don't have that kind of emphasis, much of that emphasis in past religions, because there were clergy, there were instruments for propagation and everything. Even you realize in the time of the Bab and Baha'u'llah that if you weren't of the clergy class, you dare not mention any religious subject or make a comment or a statement about it. Now, everybody's free to say whatever they think or believe and so on. Other people might not like it, but it's not anathema. It's not the grounds for you being immediately carried before the governor and sentenced to some punishment. The Bab was making spiritual pronouncements. Impossible. He's a mercer. He's a merchant. How can he possibly speak on such subjects? Baha'u'llah was a nobleman, not trained in the thing, and yet he was confounding clergy in conversations and discussions that they were having. This was very disconcerting to the population. Relying on these divine confirmations, seeing them operating through the soul is a blessing in our time. And Shoghi Effendi said, it's like now that there's no clergy, it's the Baha'is that have individually the responsibility to carry the announcement of the faith, the proclamation of the faith, and the teaching of the faith. I understand proclamation of the faith is telling people that there is such a thing. And teaching them is then, if they show some attraction to it, then you start providing details and explanations. But let the people know it exists. I remember when I was a new Baha'i, something struck me. The friend said that Abdul-Baha had said, I don't know when he was in America or where, and I don't know where it is, but the sense of it is clear, and so that we don't have to know the exact source. He says, if you're going to see a person only one time, deliver the message. If you're going to see them many times, live the life. Somebody moves in, a neighbor moves in, and you go over there and you knock on the door. Have you heard of Baha'u'llah? No. Go over there and show them kindness and love first. Establish a relationship and build confidence. Then talk about Baha'u'llah. Then it works. But the lady that's sitting next to you on the streetcar or in a bus or something, or on an airplane that you may never see again, if you can be a little more direct. I know I have fun with them saying, they'll say, well, what do you do or something? I say, well, I'm a Baha'i and I'm traveling around promoting, the Baha'i. You've heard of the Baha'is, haven't you? No. You haven't heard of them? Oh, it's a long time since I've met someone who hasn't heard of the faith. Go look it up on the internet. You can find out. Write that down. I mean, find ways that is comfortable with you to be able to deliver the message in one-on-one, or that situation you're only going to meet once, maybe. Maybe you'll meet more often if you talk about the faces, but at least the situation looks like these are total strangers, and what can you do? It's a bit more challenging on New York subways, I find, the people are in. Okay. The soul is going to the next world, and it's going to have to rely on its services. There'll be just as you hear about these different stories about people dying, and they see the events of their life pass before their eyes. There is that judgment review, implied in the writings too, that at the moment of death you'll come to know what you did that was good and what you did that wasn't good. And maybe in that you'll immediately understand which part of the scale is up and which part is down, So there's that. If you get into the next world, presuming the tunnel is not too long, you get into the next world. Baha'u'llah says in one of the tablets that the loved ones of God who go there, they will experience certain things. One of the things they experience is that they will be taken into the presence of the prophets and messengers of God, who will inquire of them that which they've suffered in the path of God. Now, friends, if we haven't done much, or if we haven't had any suffering, it was going to be a very short interview. But if you've given your whole life and then, endlessly had problems and difficulties, you'll be able to consort with the prophets for considerable time. At least that seems to be the promise. The other thing it says is you will want to witness the reality of every sanctified soul. Curious phrase. Right after this interviews with the prophets, you'll want to witness the reality of every sanctified soul. What about in this world? Can we witness the reality of sanctified souls in this world? I think I've had quite a bit of opportunity in the sense of being very close to the hands of the cause and to see the Knights of Baha'u'llah all gathered in 92. People of all different capacities, but who shone with the light of the faith in a unique way. Now, that's another thing, you hear people saying, follow religion. I don't want to be like sheep, it's like they all running in the same direction, all look the same. But the Baha'i faith is not like that. The Baha'i faith is the one power that brings out the uniqueness in your person that's different from every other person. You remember the promise, it says in the writings, that we're all a reflection of the names and attributes of God, that our reality is made out of all the names and attributes of God, and man is the only creature that reflects them all. But that this reflection is in potentia, it's a potential reflection. It has to be cultivated, but the capacity is in you. Then, at the same time, he tells us that we can all reflect all the names of God. He tells us that we are all a reflection of God, the unique, the one, the single. Which means that the way you reflect the names and attributes of God is different from every soul that's ever existed or will ever exist. Back to this wish to view the sanctified reality, or the reality of every sanctified soul. Abdu'l-Baha said he saw the face of his Father in every face. Now, you see the names and qualities of the soul of individuals when they're developed. You see it in their faces. Abdu'l-Baha says you'll see it on their brow, you'll see it in their eyes. The eyes are the mirror of the soul. And when we meet, or when sometimes we encounter Baha'is that have just, you pray together or something, you feel this closeness. You see something beyond the outer form of that. You commune with that uniqueness that is their person. Now, people say, well, how is it that if we all reflect all of them, how is it that we can be unique at the same time? Shouldn't we then be all the same? And Abdu'l-Baha answers this in a tablet he wrote as a teenager, the commentary on I was a hidden treasure, the hadith, I was a hidden treasure. I think he was 14 when he wrote this. And he elaborates on what it means. He was asked, why did the wise ones speak differently about the essence of God? Or when they describe their feelings with God, why they don't all say the same thing? They all say different things. But they're all considered saints and they're drawn close to the realities of the spiritual world. Abdu'l-Baha says it's because each soul has a dominant name of God. There's one name that pervades your reality and is coupled then with secondary and tertiary combinations of names that is your unique mark, your personality. You want to make that shine into the world. That has the capacity to give gifts to the new world order of Baha'u'llah that nobody else will ever be able to give except you. And in that sense, you'll be judged if you don't develop it and you go to the next world without it. If you go there, okay, now, we can't see God. We see the manifestation of God, but we also, there is some blessing inherent in seeing this reality when it's developed and shining in different individuals. And I felt that when I was a new Baha'i, seeing the hands of the cause of God. I remember Millie Collins, such a humble lady, but such an amazing lady. She came to see the youth in Tucson, and like some of you traveled a long way to come to this meeting. I went from Los Angeles with some of the youth over to Tucson and was in a meeting where she spoke. She was there for the summer. It was dry. She had trouble, I don't know, with the asthma or something. It was too damp in Haifa. She came to Arizona. She was living in the house of the guardian at that time, living in a room that he invited her to live in. He made her one of the hands in the Holy Land, and then he asked her to live in the house. It's amazing. Millie was very, very conscientious in her relationship with Shoghi Effendi. You know, she gave him lots of money. She gave him money to buy the temple site in Mount Carmel. And he announced that she'd done such a thing. And Ria Khanum said that Millie, when she'd hear the guardian coming downstairs, the wooden stairs in the back of the master's house, you could hear anybody going up and down. If you hear him coming down, she would go, if she was in the center part of the house at all, she would go and go back in her room, disappear, so that he wouldn't have to bother to greet her and take any of his energy with her. That was the kind of lady she was. She had the most luminous eyes. And on top of that, way back in those days, she had the thickest glasses I've ever seen, which made her pupils about that big on both eyes. And she shone like a torch. And when she looked at you and she told you about the love she had for Shoghi Effendi and the love she had for God, you just melt, you know. I've never seen anything like that in my life. Amazing. So there we have that sharing that we need to do with each other. We need to be spiritual to inspire each other, to uplift each other. And Shoghi Effendi said we didn't draw enough on the spiritual fellowship which should exist amongst Baha'is. The supportive spiritual element, praying for each other, hoping that we can achieve these spiritual goals, rather than hoping we can get a good job or we can get a better house or whatever it is that people are worried about most of the time. How do we transcend that? And then to eliminate the prejudices that we might have because of social differences or ethnic differences, ridiculous kind of limitations, you know. The soul, the quality of soul of each individual is the treasure that we should aim at. When Corinne True, who was the hand of the cause related to the building of the American House of Worship, when she was a little girl, her Mother True, she took her on pilgrimage. And amongst things that Abdu'l-Baha said, this in 1909, among things that Abdu'l-Baha said, he said that you must look upon all the souls that you meet as letters from your beloved. That if you received a letter from your loved one, the one you love best in the world, you would kiss it, if it arrived torn or dirty or wrinkled, it wouldn't be important to you. It was the message in there that's what you were looking for, the message from your beloved. And to see other souls that way, they come to us wrinkled and stained and every other which way, but one of the miracles that touches the souls is when we address that part of them. We see that part of them, they don't see it. But because we see it, it awakens in them the possibility that it exists in them. And such a gift that is, such a divine gift that is. So when we say we ask Baha'u'llah, assist me to breathe the breath of life into dead hearts or into weakened hearts, sleeping hearts. This is the meaning of it, I think, is to let them see something about the nature that they have in them, and which we really have the eyes to see. We have the capacity to see that. I mean, if we're following if you will, the formula of the Master who looked upon, see how he looked upon everyone. He looked upon the potential, tried to awaken the potential in the people. How sad we will be if we get to the next world and realize we didn't develop our own potential, which would have been the means of awakening that in other souls. So teaching is not delivering pamphlets and, passing the message, but rather breathing life into the hearts of others. And to do that, Abdu'l-Baha says you have to enrich yourselves. The poor cannot give to the poor. We have to be spiritually endowed and rich with the bounties of God, and then we've got it to give to others. He gives such wonderful, such simple formulas, to make us think about it and hopefully fill us with confidence that we can do this, that his promise is there if we arise. Let the doubter arise and see. So, basically, that's the challenge that I like to hang in the air. I don't want to hit you on the head with it, but hang in the air. I was telling the friends in London, I said, I used to go around and try to rouse the Baha'is and get them to move as a house member. But now that I'm retired and living in the countryside and outside Sacramento and lying in a hammock in the sun, I feel I can't quite do that the way I used to do it. So I can just suggest these things to you now at this point. I get out of the hammock as often as I can, but it's there. All right, friends, that's the kind of the wind-up of that. I would like to go to questions to see if perhaps that will provide some insight. And if you have other written questions you want to pass over here, we can begin looking at those. All right, here's one about how do we make teaching the dominant passion of our lives. I would hope that the answer that I would like to offer you is everything I've said today, because all of it is aimed at that. In other words, the transformation of the individual consciousness is to lead it to the point where the teaching and sharing of the divine message, being a channel of grace into the world, is really the purpose of our existence. And how can we come close to the meaning of that? So I don't think I have anything very special to say about that apart from what we've talked about from the teachings. Which of the talks by the Master made while he was visiting North America do you find most motivational or most significant? This is for the Baha'is. I suggest that you go to the volume like I was mentioning earlier and try to distinguish between the talks to the Baha'is and the talks to the public and see which one you think is the most motivational thing. They all have a terrific impulse to the Baha'is. and have many verbs like endeavor or make an effort or strive, or he's trying to get the Baha'is to arise, over and over, and talking about the love that should exist between them. I find all of them very, very moving. My heavens, let's say a bit about your experience of returning to the States after so many years in the Holy Land. Well, I find it's a terrific motivation to travel to other continents. No, we were gone. My wife and I were both from Southern California, born and raised in Southern California, and we've been gone 50 years. And really, we came back to a different country than we left, especially the California country. The nation there is a special kind of nation. And people say, well, why didn't you go back? If you're going to go back to California, why didn't you go to Southern California? And we just, both of us felt that the materialism there and the congestion, just too many people, too close together in that particular style of life, we didn't feel like we were ready to go back into that. And secretly, I think we were a little afraid of the Baha'is, because we knew so many Baha'is down there. We would be in a social whirl all the time. So my wife said, let's go out to the countryside someplace. So we were originally going to Spain, and we thought that it would be closer. We have a son. He's remained in the Holy Land, and that would be easier to see him. But it was very hard to settle there as retired people, and all kinds of requirements, law requirements, and registering of every last thing you owned. They wanted a list of everything you're bringing into the country. We had to strip ourselves down to nothing, and then deposit $20,000, and then wait a year to see whether they thought that you had kept all the materials that you brought. And this was a result of excesses from other countries going to Spain with private goods that became saleable after the people got there. So we just got caught in that squeeze, and we decided that we were appreciative of the National Assembly of the United States as being good caretakers. Isn't that right, David? Yes.
You are right, sir.
Thank you. So we came back here as a base from which we could travel and visit so many parts of the world that I haven't seen yet. I've seen a lot. I mean, Latin America, the Western Hemisphere I've seen most of all of Europe now. I've been over 16 countries of Africa. I've been as far east as India. I've been to China. But I haven't seen Japan and Taiwan and Thailand and the Philippines and Papua New Guinea and Australia and New Zealand and the islands of the Pacific. Particularly, I haven't seen those, and I'm hoping that I'll have a chance before I get too feeble to go out there and smile a little bit. We were shocked by so many different complicated procedures that we didn't understand. I mean, just getting a driver's license, taking the test, driving for years. No. Okay, what attracted you to the faith? Well, I've been searching for the cause and not knowing what I was searching for, but I know my parents kept saying, you're so cynical. You would be so cynical at 17, 18 years old. I said, the people don't know what they're doing. Nobody seems to know why they're alive or what their purpose is. I can't live like that. I don't have any motivation to go and get a job and just labor to have money to eat and sleep, and it's not enough. They said, what are you talking about? When I finally found the faith and tried to tell them about it, my mother said, oh, you and Bula Hula. I think she's gone on to the next world. I think she's probably repented of that by now, having found certain advantages in having Baha'i relatives. Now, to the dear soul, she came to the World Center at one stage, much later, and she said, she was a dyed-in-the-wool Christian Scientist. If any of you have Christian Science relatives, you know what that means. It's just impenetrable. And she says, well, it's not the truth, she said, but it's been so good for you, dear. And then she lived forever. She was in her 90s, and all her friends died. And one time she called me and she said, "Honey, I know you know a lot of nice people, the Baha'is here in Southern California." She said, "I'd like to get to know some of them. I don't have any friends anymore." And the dear Baha'is took her on. And she became the dowager of Thanksgiving and other non-spiritual events, so to speak, with the wonderful Diliberto family in Southern California. And they had some older relatives, aunts and things, who hadn't ever become Baha'is either, so that the old ladies would get together and enjoy each other. And when she passed away, they held a wonderful memorial meeting. Baha'is held a wonderful memorial meeting for her. So touching. They composed music, poetry. And some of the young people were quoting some of these Christian Science lines that came out of her mouth, like, "All is spirit, must hold to the spirit." And they were moved by those things because they'd understand them in a Baha'i context, I think, is basically what was happening. So she was appreciated. And would you talk about your art and your faith? Yes, I will sometime. That's a big subject. The friends in Florida, they have a Baha'i-inspired conference called Wings to the Spirit every year, and they feature all types of Baha'is in the arts. They asked me to speak this year about whatever, and I spoke about the relationship of spirituality and art in the period of the master's lifetime. All the old academic way of doing things, which was the standard, where you painted photorealism the best you could, and the themes that you were allowed were the Greek and Roman ideals and things of that nature. When people started painting peasants, gleaners of leftover potatoes and things, there was scandal in France about this thing. And now we look upon those kind of paintings are in the Louvre and other places. And then that died down, and then Impressionism came. Distortion of God's nature and truth. Smudges of paints, outrageous, And then along came the abstract artists and Cubism, Cézanne and the others. Even Mondrian says at one point, he says, when religion fails to feed the human spirit, art arises in its place. Well, of course, that could be music and painting and everything, but he was thinking more of painting. So they felt the revolution and change. And Abdu'l-Baha said that every walk of human life has been renewed and refreshed. And shouldn't it happen in religion as well? It's trying to connect that with the faith. So that's an interesting subject for Baha'is in the arts, as to how there's been such a change after centuries of one kind of art, how there's been such a change which broke all the barriers. So you've got all kinds of abstract art and strange, distorted art, and some of it is the prostitution of the arts, as Shoghi Effendi warns about. It's used, then you're using art to stimulate carnality and material desire or sexual desire or whatever. There's a lot of that going on. A lot of fake art, a lot of the Emperor's New Clothes art that, dealing with these New York art galleries. Some of the art galleries, you would think the gallery owners would know better, but the gallery owners are married to these new artists in the sense that they make money out of them and they produce sensational things, One of the high-selling French things from the end of the last century, which now are available from time to time in auctions, is a can of one artist's excrement. He canned about 50 cans of it, put labels on it, and that's very chic. I don't know why. So I'm saying that some of the art is not art at all. It's just ridiculous. It's gone so far that there's no... I don't know how it can go any farther, but Shoghi Effendi said it will continue to decline, that society and its morals will continue to decline even after the lesser peace. Marion Hoffman asked him about that. Surely after the lesser peace, Shoghi Effendi, the behavior of the people will improve. He said, no, it'll continue to decline. But all of that puts the outer society in contrast with the New World Order. And then it creates this power to attract more and more people to it. But friends, relax. We're talking about centuries for this to take place. There's like in evolution, there's some sudden spurts of change that'll take place, but don't expect too much to happen too fast. But don't expect anything to happen if you don't do something now. That's the other part of it. You won't be able to see it. You won't be able to witness it. How does one deal with difficult tests? There's a whole day's seminar, I think, on that subject alone. How do you deal with it? We're told that we have a life of prayer. We try to weigh things within the light of the teachings to see why is this a test? Sometimes the test is simply our own lower nature is failing us, We keep falling back into old habits and things that we shouldn't do. We bring tests on ourselves. Two kinds of tests. One that we create through our own foolishness, and another that's sent to us by God to help us evolve. Blessings, tests that are blessings, in the sense, if we meet any test in the right light, and it helps us, it lifts us, then it's a blessing. But if we keep repeating the same test, of course, we get a bit stagnant in our position, Abdu'l-Baha says that God sends us tests, and we face the test and we fail the test. And then he sends the test again and we fail the test. And then he sends the test again and we fail the test. Speaking to Dr. Getzinger, saying this, fail over and over again until somehow it comes to us in moment of desperation that I'm not going to be able to pass this test. This test is an obstacle for my growth forever. I've got to get over this. But I can't get over it. I see I have no capacity to get over it. And then the Master says, then the soul begs God to help. Up to now has been trying to pass the test with its own resources, not working. But now he's desperate, and the soul says, please, I beg you, I can't do this, and you're telling me I have to pass it, and I have to move to the next stage, and I can't. And he says, then the test is sent again, and the soul passes it, without a big effort even. And it gets the idea that God can help with the test. Until it gets the next test, then it tries to do it itself again, and it's a curious kind of a process, but when you see yourself desperate that you can't pass the test, remember this, If it's too much for you, lean on me, Abdu'l-Baha says. Lean on my shoulder. And we have that wonderful promise that no one has ever tested beyond their capacity. And I hear what the Baha'is say once in a while, I must have a terrific capacity. What attracted me to the faith, I started with that, I didn't go on with it. It was the question of the spirit of the Baha'is, I think, really touched me as I went into these meetings. And I saw the kindness that the Baha'is had with each other and with the others in the fireside situation that I was in. I was really touched about that. But I'd had a kind of inner experience, a vision the week before that prepared me, that I felt I was going to find a solution. And then that same week, someone invited me to a Baha'i meeting. And I felt that feeling again. That was one of the things that gave me the giggles. I was pretty excited about it. How do you teach someone who doesn't believe in God? I think first you have to decide whether you want to teach this person. I mean, in one sense, I I think the ideal situation here is that the person who doesn't believe in God says, but how can I believe in God? Okay. If they're at least open to trying to understand, how do you believe in God? And how can you believe when it's so impossible? You can't see, you see all these shortcomings in the world and the sufferings of people and the unfairness, the injustice of it all. And of course, lives have resources for that to talk about that. Creation is, God has created creation, has given it to mankind, He sustains it, and mankind has misorganized it in a sense and has contributed to so much of the violence and the injustice. So why blame that on God? God's part is, and then they'll say something about the tsunami. Well, I don't want to get into that, but I think there are indications in the faith that some of these terrible things that happen are because of our immorality. You know, this is the old kind of God and vengeful God, and He'll punish you if you misbehave. But there is something to that. Abdu'l-Baha makes some comments, and there's a verse from Baha'u'llah. He says that the floods, he's talking about the floods in Iran. He said they were caused by the tears of orphans, of the martyrs and the people that had suffered. Well, we don't know how all that works, you know, so some of it is, if we're to understand what the Guardian says about God, and God is the avenger, God is the punisher, these are a stern father, but also a loving father that's helping mankind turn to the revelation that He's gifted to humanity. And things are going to get tougher until people start waking up. So I think it's inevitable. But that's a kindness on the part of God. Because here's this greatest revelation that's ever been that can provide them with, like a rocket ship through all eternity, and they're ignoring it. They're losing out. So where is the mercy and kindness? To let the people continue in this deep sleep of brutal materialism, or to send some tests to wake them up and make them think about it. And hopefully the Baha'is will have thought about it enough to be able to provide answers to these people when events like that take place. But as I was saying earlier, I think you can praise people who can't believe in this God. Remember, there's a story about Mr. Furtan. He was studying in Moscow just after the revolution. You know, he was in university there. And I mean, it was strictly forbidden for anybody to believe in God. You couldn't have a religion and expect to remain in the university. You would be expelled or punished or whatever. And he had a roommate, and the roommate just had this intuition about that he was religious, that he was spiritual in character, Mr. Furtan. One day the roommate faced him with it. He said, You believe in God, don't you? Mr. Furtan, as fast as Mr. Furtan was, and he was very speedy, he said, No, he said, I don't believe in the God you don't believe in. And it's a good answer for people who ask us, you know, how can you believe in God, you know? Well, that one that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. And all of these marvelous teachings that how can the infinite maker and consciousness behind this whole universe fit into my little imagination, you know? It's just not appropriate that He should. No need that he might. The manifestation is the power at a level appropriate to all of our fulfillment and happiness, and accompanies us in the next world as well. There's a letter from Shoghi Effendi says, you don't see God in the next world, you see the manifestation of God. That's meeting God in the next world. That's the meaning of meeting God in the next world. The manifestations are not God. There's something behind. But just like you say, I believe in the manifestation, but I don't understand Him. I believe in the manifestation because of the effect His Spirit has in my soul. And the manifestation tells us the same thing. I find this power in me, comprehends the whole of human existence and reality, and on the basis of that, I'm inspired to give laws and so on. From my own inner spiritual nature, I have that capacity. But I can't see back to the essence of God. The way is barred and it's closed, and there's no need to see back there. And so this is interesting. You know, the manifestations, several places themselves say 10,000 prophets as great as Moses stand thunderstruck with the interdiction from God, "Thou shalt never behold me." So I think that can be the means to reaching people who don't believe in God. And then you separate the issue of believing in God and believing in a creator. First off, just on the basis of sound reason, how can you believe that something that exists with such complicated design doesn't have a creator? And everything that we create that's complicated, we know that the creator is greater in consciousness, encompasses and develops that creature or that thing. So how would it be that God has no consciousness of his creation? There you have to make the big leap to prophets of God and messages of God and word of God. But if you can get to the appreciation for a creator, that's a start. And these days with the Hubble telescope and looking at the ends of the universe and seeing there's no ends of the universe, you know what Baha'u'llah says after what? There's no end to the physical universe. I try to stick that in your head. No end to it, No end to the number of galaxies. Endless galaxies, forever and ever in all directions. And in every one of those galaxies, there are numerous solar systems. Billions of solar systems in each galaxy. And those solar systems have planets, and those planets have creatures and manifestations of God, every one of them throughout the entire universe. It doesn't say quite that directly and boldly, but you put the pieces together and you find it. But so we're not trying to, startle people with something like that. But as Baha'is, we should understand we're going to discover it. Shoghi Effendi, joking with the pilgrims, he said we've had national conferences and international conferences and continental conferences, and we're going to have a world congress, and eventually be interplanetary conferences, and smiled and went on with some other subject. But why would it be void? The whole purpose, Abdu'l-Baha says, the whole purpose of life in this planet is the coming into being of the human race. Because the human race is the one thing that chooses consciousness of its maker, chooses love of God. So he says in the constitution of a planet, the human species is the head of the body. Can you imagine a creator that creates a body without a head? I think that if you extrapolate that and extend it into the universe. Now, Abdu'l-Baha says I saw a tablet the other day that I hadn't seen before. It's just newly translated. He says that there are vaporous beings and aqueous beings and fiery beings. And that that souls and beings in other planets are made in conformity with the chemical constitution of those planets. So we can only consider, oxygen breathing individual. We don't know the possibilities of God. It's creative possibilities. You can see what you see. Just here the variety is. Why should we imagine there couldn't be a full variety? But something about the implications of other civilizations combining with ours in the future, ours is not a very glorious thing to combine with. I think we're probably on the quarantine list for the moment. Another thing, Mr. Olinga said on his pilgrimage, Shoghi Effendi, one day he said to him, Abdu'l-Baha said this was the hell of the planets, the most backward of them. Implications of this solar system, but backward. And it kind of took him back, he said. And he added his own phrase, the Guardian added his own phrase, the tail of the dog. Oh, ouch. And then Shoghi Effendi said, Mr. Linga said, he riveted me, he looked right in my eyes. He said, they still make war. Do you want a reason to know how backward the planet is? These creatures that have been provided everything by their maker with all bounty and favor and mercy, they combine in different ways to destroy each other and blow each other up. And it's really backward is not the word for it. We're trying to rescue the human race from a very low condition. And people will say, there'll always be war and there's always... Yeah, okay. Naysayers, that's right. Are we exempt from fasting and obligatory prayers after age 70? I hope so. Or I'm in trouble. May we still observe them? Surely you can observe them. There's no limitations to that, but you're certainly exempt from them. And somebody asked, are we exempt because of ill health after that age? And Shoghi Effendi said, no, you're exempt because of age. So enjoy, whatever. What is the difference between vain imaginings and idle fancies? Now there's a study you could... doctoral thesis of some sort. Does anybody want to venture a trial on that one? I find that one confounds with the other all the time. It just, they're mother and father of all the problems, or husband and wife of my poor situation, or whatever it is. But vain imaginings, has something to do with the ego, I think, and the vanity, and how I look to others, the games I play in that regard. Idle fancies, hopes for things that have no meaning, significance. I'm sure you'd like more about that, but I don't have anything else to say. Could you talk more about the soul, its different powers, dual nature? How is it that the lower nature is left behind when we die? Well, let's start with the last one here. The lower nature is left behind when we die because it's the animal nature. It is the animal part of us. And the animal kingdom goes back to dust here. The body is an animal kingdom product, and it goes back to dust. So that part doesn't go with us. But the soul is not a composite reality, Abdu'l-Baha says. It's an existence. It's an emanation from God that exists in us. It's if, something is shining from His reality is shining in us. And it's not in the body, but yet it animates the body. And the soul itself has various facets to it. It has the most common facet we all have is the one that runs the autonomic nervous system and provides you tears in your eyes and saliva in your mouth and coordinates the healing processes that take place. So everything, the power of life that's trying to keep your animal self alive. But within that, we have letters and things that say that there's a seed, there's a precious seed within that human soul. And that's the seed of the human spirit. And that when it hears about the reality of or comes into contact with the influence of the Holy Spirit, that seed germinates. Then it needs nourishment. It needs constant food, so to speak. And the food of it is, of course, the reading. You become a new Baha'i, you want to continue to read the words of Baha'u'llah and everything to feed that. And that soul develops. And that soul becomes the means then of illuminating the soul, the lower soul. That's the human spirit, the immortal human spirit. And eternality is not to be confused with continuity of existence. All souls continue to exist within a realm of their own if they haven't had the gift of eternal life. And the gift of eternal life is that they have consciously turned to the Holy Spirit of the manifestations of God and taken on a new existence. Abdu'l-Baha says the others continue to exist after death, and they are in a world that's mostly fashioned by their own imaginings. God help us. You know what your bad dreams are full of. You don't want to live in a world like that. So get it together, friends, please. Dual nature. What's the dual nature, of course, is that this higher nature that's a potential to be there but doesn't always exist. Everything in being a Baha'i is to help awaken it, of course, and then to fan it into life, into fuller life. By the time it gets to the point where you've got enough flame that you can pass it on to others, then you're in the teaching mode. Abdu'l-Baha says the poor can't give to the poor. You have to be rich to give. You have to enrich yourself to be able to give to the poor. How can the ignorant pass knowledge to others? He said you have to make yourself wise yourself from the writings, and that's what you do from the writings. Shoghi Effendi in a letter says a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing in the teaching of the faith. You can put people off so easily. You want to know the teachings and give them in their proper light and truth. And hope you don't waste away too many in the process of learning. Better to keep studying and at the same time, you can pass information about the existence of the faith, but don't try to answer questions that you don't know anything about. But simply say, I know there are answers to all these questions in the faith, and I can take you to someone who can answer, or we can find a passage in a book that will answer it. Much better and admit that you don't know the answer to the question, than try to invent something that, I think that, may not have the same effect. Someone asked a question about a book written in English by Artemis Lamb about the beginnings of the Baha'i faith in Latin America. I think all these things do exist in the World Center, but if you wanted to send it somewhere, it would be there to the House of Justice. But you could better write a letter to the House of Justice and say, I have a copy of this. Is this something which doesn't exist in the World Center? If it doesn't, I'll be happy to contribute it. Otherwise, keep it yourself. I know the work myself. I've seen it. And here's another one about art. We're wondering about your artistic side. Would love to hear about this, some thoughts on the creative process. Well, this is, earlier we're talking about the inspiration that comes through dreams, and then that inspiration is a constant. And to the degree that we detach ourselves from the world, we get images. That inspiration comes in the form of new musical thoughts to musicians or composers, and new forms and images for artists, and new literary forms. That same word of God, and that same flow of inspiration that is the soul of that word, so to speak, comes into the individual and produces new literature, new sciences, all kinds of things. So, as an artist, you generally want to keep deepening yourself in the faith and saying your prayers, but it's not a question of, saying the greatest name and then making a drawing. Someone wrote, they said, I have this, I write automatically, I write poetry, I write this, and the Spirit informs me, and I write it. And what do you think of this, Shoghi Effendi? The guardian doesn't want to discourage you, but he writes back and he says that I think you're dabbling in psychic practices, that the great arts have all come through the mind. They're conscious, mental. You learn the techniques of your materials, and then you have the inspiration of the form to cast into the materials. And an artist develops that way. He has an agenda of possibilities, because you get to know the nature of the paint, the nature of the colors, the way things work together over and over. You're finding different ways to, and then impregnate that with the spiritual conception that you may have. I don't know. But talk too much about that, but they asked me that at the gallery in front of non-Baha'is. What do you say? I said, I think that, my art, I like to think it has something to do with forms that are not yet substantial as natural forms in the outside world, but they are the impulses, if you will, of creative impulses. So I symbolize them in little crosses and circles and different images within it, moving within it, just because that somehow represents to me that field of pre-existence that's coming and will eventually be all the things that we know in the outside world. What can you say? That usually quiets them down anyway. How would Abdu'l-Baha answer a question about the seeming contradiction of the faith's emphasis on equality between men and women not being allowed to serve in the house of justice. Well, fortunately, he answered that. We don't have to guess how he would answer it. He answered it. He said that the reason for this is not known at the present time, and it will become as clear as the sun at midday in the future. And the House of Justice said that future hasn't arrived yet. So swallow hard. And I can say something to you that's important in not discussing the subject with non-Baha'is who may bring it up. There's a couple of points that you can say. One is that the position of teaching in the faith is higher than the position of administrator. And the hands of the cause of God were the leading propagators of the faith, and there have been many outstanding women amongst them. Administrators at the level of this legislative body have been limited to men, but the women have been the great leaders and great teachers of the faith in the West, too, who are all women. If you look at the galaxy of Baha'i immortals, Lua Getzinger and Martha Root and Mae Maxwell and I suppose Ria Conham now. But she would say, don't say that. Then you've got, of course, Julia Thompson joined that crowd. And you had Hai Dun, one man amongst them all in the list that Chogi Effendi gives of this immortal galaxy of Baha'i heroes and heroines. Oh, amazing. There's a cable when Mae Maxwell passes away, with similar parallel cables in Persian for Mae Maxwell's passing and Martha Root's passing. And Shoghi Effendi announces to the East that the mortal soul of Miss Martha Root has ascended to the concourse on high, and the inmates of the all-highest paradises have rushed forth with chalices of light and are cheering from all sides, "Well done, well done, O maidservant of God." My God. Does that tell you something about Shoghi Effendi that we may not have known? In his messages to the Persians, he says, Baha'u'llah at this moment cheers your activities and calls to you, saying, "O ye followers of the Blessed Perfection," and quotes Baha'u'llah from there, now. Guardian of the cause of God, is only the sign of God on earth. We've got a lot to learn about Shoghi Effendi too. He veiled himself to the West in the sense of being your true brother. Put too much of a test. And even then, when I became a Baha'i, the issue was not women on the House of Justice. The issue was you have a pope. Are you old enough to know how difficult that every time you went to the Baha'i gatherings, you were waiting for somebody to say, but how can you have one man be the head of your faith, Now we don't have one man, we have 9 men, but we don't have any women, so that's another problem. So, okay. The one thing was that women in the highest positions of the cause, in that sense. The prophets have always been men. I don't know, you can't speculate about the future about that, but they've always been men. We don't have any history of. So there's something about the vehicle, the masculine vehicle, for that kind of, for law-giving, for justice, maybe that has something. Although if Abdu'l-Baha says we don't understand it now, certainly I'm not going to be able to invent a proper answer. So anything I say you can discount and say, well, it's not that then. The other thing that to remember is a tablet of Abdu'l-Baha where he says that gender is an accident of the physical world. That the soul has no sex. No gender now is used more than sex. But he says no sex. It's not male or female until it enters into the womb. And at that moment it becomes either a female or a male. Which means that the inherent spiritual character of the eternal soul is not one of the things of why women aren't on the House of Justice. It has other things. They asked Ian, why aren't women on the House of Justice? He said, Mercy of God. Probably that's an answer only the House member could give, but people would find that a bit troublesome too. But in a sense it is. Why are there only 9 men on the House of Justice when there's billions of men on the planet? Really? You're all left out, most of you. I don't know, some of you may make it, I don't know. You can't tell here. If you try, you won't make it, be sure. The ones that try, I always say, their punishment should be to become members of the House of Justice. Oh, surprise, it's not what I thought it was. Yeah. Okay, reiterate how important the feast is and why it should be honored. Definitely, this is a law that comes from the Bab, confirmed by Baha'u'llah. It's the fountain, that we approach once a month to refresh ourselves, renew ourselves. And we should pray before we go to it that we can act in the proper way in the feast rather than going there expecting something from it for us. It's a very important element in the Baha'i month. But to be what it is, Baha'is are going to have to discover it and serve it. It's something you do, not to get something from it. You want to contribute to it. You want to go with hoping that God will enable you to add to the spirit of it so that bond of unity and spiritual refreshment will be present in the feast. And that the Baha'is won't argue with each other or... If you can't manage that, I don't know what to tell you. Some people's solution is to just fall asleep in the feast. Which of the Baha'i books are excellent to be read together? For example, God Passes By and the Dunbar is a good answer to the question. What other books would be good to study together? Well, I was talking about with David earlier, some of the letters I saw of the Guardian. The Baha'is were constantly assailed by the non-Baha'is. You don't have a Bible, we have a Bible. You don't have a Bible. Then we had Baha'i scriptures, but that wasn't so broadly known, and it had things in it which were not altogether authentic. Some of them were pilgrim accounts and things like that. So Shoghi Effendi created the Gleanings. Gleanings from the writings of Baha'u'llah is a representative volume of the whole of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Carefully edited by Shoghi Effendi, translated, ordered, and he said there, everything in it is suitable for the public. In other words, you don't have to feel that you shouldn't give this to non-Baha'is. This is for non-Baha'is who ask. It's for the Baha'is, first and foremost for the Baha'is. You have to familiarize yourself with all the different modes of revelation that Baha'u'llah uses, that he mentions, for example, in the tablet of the temple. He says that his revelation is in 9 distinct modes of revelation. And the Bab had already talked about that in the past, that he revealed in 5 modes and so on. So all of that is reflected in the Gleanings. And it's a book which I think I would recommend to the Baha'is to be reading all the time. You have a bookmark, you start reading it, and you read, and then you mark it, and then you read some more, and you mark it. Morning and evening readings, perhaps, and then when you're at the end, you go back to the beginning again. It's like the Igan. Shoghi Effendi says that the Baha'is should be constantly reading and rereading the Igan. This is the most important book of doctrine that's ever been given to mankind. And it takes a while for it to reveal itself. It's complicated. And he said the Baha'is must master each and every detail. He said this in a letter in the content of that book. It's a major challenge. And he said, one set of pilgrim notes says, there was a pilgrim here last week. I asked if they had read the Igan, if they'd studied the Igan. And he said, one American said, yes, I did it. Says, friends, we can't do the Igan. So you have to do it over. You have to read it and reread it and continually refresh yourself at that source. So the Igan and the Gleanings, you'll find in the gleanings, Shoghi Effendi has extracted 24 paragraphs from the Igan and combined them in 6 distinct sections. And I think those are really the heart of the Igan, the passages that are of major significance, that Shoghi Effendi would extract them and put them there. There's some passages of the Kitab-i-Aqdas in there, passages of Epistle to the Son of the Wolf. One, there's something from Hidden Words. In other words, it has a lot. And it has 5 different sections. The first part about the day of God, the greatness of the day of God, then something about the character of God's creation and the elements of the soul, and this tablet that I was citing about when the soul goes to the next world, what it experiences, that's in the gleanings. And then it has the messages to the kings, and finally it has general exhortations to the Baha'is, to the followers, how mankind should behave itself, and the wonderful prayer towards the end of the gleanings about to one of his followers called Ali, who evidently has been asking for forgiveness either for himself or for others. And Baha'u'llah reveals this wonderful tablet. He said, if it were not for the sins and shortcomings of the people, how would God's name, the forgiver, function? How would God's name, the merciful, operate? Praise be to God for their sins and their shortcomings. Very interesting thing to read. I mean, at least it makes me feel good. I'm sorry. So I think you can, but this pairing of God Passes By and the Dawn Breakers is very, very, very useful. Even to read the first 5 chapters of God Passes By, and before you start reading the Dawnbreakers itself, because he's got this condensed. The Guardian had to condense everything. Khanum said he worked 2 years on God Passes By, condensing things. Now, you know what condensed food is like. You have to take it and chew it a lot and add liquid, and it gradually expands, and you understand that all the thing is there, but it needs a lot of thinking about, a lot of digesting it to draw out its implications. And then you'll be prepared for the Dawnbreakers, which Shoghi Effendi in one letter says the Baha'i should consider as the source for all literary and artistic pursuits within the faith. Interesting. The spirit animating the Dawnbreakers is the spirit of the heroic age of the faith, so to speak. What's this? I think that covers those. So you've been very patient. Thank you very much, friends. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I hope you'll have some wonderful new spiritual discoveries in the days ahead. And if you haven't been following the progress of Abdu'l-Baha's travels in America, if you have a computer, you can find the Centenary site, and you can find 239days.com, which is another one, which gives quotes from the diaries of people from that day, and what the Master said, and where he visited, and what he saw, and some photographs of him. It's a very lovely way to, without studying it all at once, to absorb it over the course of the year. And you can move back in the days for those you've missed if you have the intention and urge to do so. But you can't move ahead. You have to wait for the next day. Wish you all a speedy return to your homes. Thank you very much.